All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're basically building a blueprint. We're going to use some really fresh 2024 data to get a super clear picture of what a typical, successful local dive shop looks like right now. So if you're running a shop, or maybe you're dreaming of opening one, this is absolutely for you. Okay, let's dive in. You know, it's a question a lot of us in the industry kick around. Are we doing things right? How do we stack up against the competition? Well, today we're going to answer that. We're going to build out a benchmark blueprint, giving you a really solid picture of the modern dive operation.
So here's the game plan. First, we'll quickly define what we're talking about when we say dive shop. Then we'll follow the money and look at the financials. After that, we'll meet the team, check out what's actually being sold, and finally, we'll put it all together so you can see where you fit.
Okay, so all of our information, our entire blueprint, it's built on solid ground. It comes from the 2024 State of the Dive Industry Survey put together by the Business of Diving Institute. And for this, we're really zeroing in on data from the USA and Western Europe, because that's where most of the survey responses came from.
So, who are we actually talking about here? Well, the data is coming almost entirely from owners and managers of established, independent shops. Now, this is really important. The results tend to skew towards the larger, more successful businesses, so you got to keep that in mind. The blueprint we're building, it represents a thriving, successful operation.
All right, let's lay the foundation. I mean, nothing defines a business blueprint more clearly than the money, right? We're going to look at the big top-line numbers first, and then we're going to break down exactly where that cash is coming from.
So what's the big number?
Get this, for a typical successful dive shop in the US, the average annual sales in 2023 were just over $500,000. That is a huge benchmark to start with. And in Western Europe, the number was also really strong, coming in at about $440,000 US. So, where does that $500,000 actually come from? Well, it turns out that for shops in the US, training is king. It brings in almost a third of all the revenue. Right behind that, you've got gear sales at 27%, and then dive travel rounds out the top three, pulling in 14%. Now here's where it gets really interesting. When we put the US model side by side with Western Europe, you see some fascinating differences. European shops lean even more heavily into training. That's 37% of their business. Gear sales, almost identical. But look at travel. It's a huge piece of the pie in the US of 14%, but it's only 5% of revenue for shops in Europe. This just goes to show you there's not just one path to success. These are two very different playbooks for being profitable.
Okay, we've seen the money. Now let's talk about the people who make it all happen. A business is just a building without its team, so what does the crew of a typical dive shop actually look like?
And wow, the difference in scale is pretty much immediate, especially when you look at the training department. A US dive shop has, on average, almost 4 dive masters and over 8 instructors. Now compare that to Europe, with just over 1 dive master and just under 4 instructors. American operations are they're running with much, much larger teaching teams.
I mean, just look at that gap. We're talking more than double the number of instructors in the US. This points to a totally different way of staffing. Maybe the US model relies on a bigger pool of part-time or seasonal instructors to handle the busy seasons, while in Europe, it's more of a smaller, core full-time team.
Okay, next up, let's get into the nuts and bolts of the whole operation. What are these shops selling? Where are they teaching? And how are they using the internet to get it all done? This is where we get into the nitty-gritty details that really define a shop's character. Whoa, okay. Talk about a digital divide. European shops are doing almost a third of their gear sales online. A third! Meanwhile, in the US, it's less than 10%. That is a massive gap in e-commerce strategy. It tells us that European businesses are way more plugged into online sales channels than their American counterparts are.
And that story continues when you look at what's actually on the shelves. In the US, the focus seems to be on accessibility. Tons of snorkeling gear, lots of travel packages. But in Europe, the shop is catering to a more technical diver, with a bigger focus on gear like rebreathers and freediving equipment. Just two different worlds.
Hey, remember how training was a bigger piece of the revenue pie in Europe? Well, this right here might help explain why. A much higher percentage of European shops, 58% of them, have their own dedicated training pool, either right on site or somewhere else they control. That kind of consistent access, that's a huge advantage for building a strong training program. So, we've looked at the money, we've looked at the people, and we've looked at the products. Now it's time to put all those pieces together into our final blueprint.
This is the part where you can take all this data and kind of hold it up like a mirror to your own operation.
So here they are, the two distinct models that have really come into focus. The US blueprint, it's built on higher overall revenue, a big teaching staff, and a real focus on travel and experiences. The European blueprint, on the other hand, is a leaner model. It's got a smaller core team, a stronger focus on technical gear, and a much more developed e-commerce game.
And, if there's one single idea that ties all of this data together, it's this quote right here. The trend is clear, no matter where you are. The business is moving away from just selling stuff and moving towards selling experiences, whether that's training or travel or cool local diving events. The real value is shifting from the gear you sell to the experiences you create.
So, we've laid out the blueprint, built from the industry's most successful players. Now the real question is for you to answer. Looking at this, where does your business fit? And maybe more importantly, now that you've seen the data, where do you want to steer your shop next? Thanks for digging into this with us.